Welcome to this week's Parsha, Parsha's Vayishlach. I'm looking forward to share a few very beautiful ideas with you. The first relates to a well-known episode in this week's Parsha, but I want to begin by making reference to a late uncle of my wife, Mr. Joe Reed. Why? Because there is a phrase we use in the family, the Joe Reed effect. What does that mean? You see, Joe Reed, Uncle Joe, was a wonderful person. He was a tremendous askan, involved in very many worthy causes. He was the president of Hen Radas here in London for decades and ran and was very involved in the JSSM, the Jewish Secondary School movements, which Hasmonean is one of the main schools. And he was a very communally minded person. And he had a gift, he had many gifts, but one of his gifts was that he could speak to anybody about anything. And he could talk to you in your language. So if you liked Torah, he would talk to you in Torah. If you liked politics, politics, business, business, sports, but whatever it was, the Joe Reed effect. And I think about that in reference to Rashi in this week's Sedra. How so? Let's take a look. If you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout. The Parsha begins, Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim lefonov el Esav Achiv. Yaakov sends Malachim to Esav, Arz Aseas to Edom, and he sends a message. What's the message that Yaakov is sending to his brother? Vayitzav Esom Lema Kaisoy Mrun Ladoni Esav. This is what you should say to my master Esav. Kay Omar Avducha Yaakov im Lovon Garti Vo'echar Ad Ata. So says your master, your servant Yaakov im Lovon Garti. I've been living with Lovon and I've been delayed until now. Says Rashi famously. Garti is B'gematria Taryag. Kolema. What was the message that Yaakov was giving Esav? Im Lovon Harosha Garti. I was living with this Lovon, this Rasha. V'tayag mitzvahs shamatin. Nevertheless, I kept 613 mitzvahs. V'loila madati mimaisiv haroim, and I didn't learn from his evil ways. There endeth the famous Rashi. It's very strange. Imagine Yaakov Avinu was sending a telegram to Esav, and you're a historian. You discover this telegram. The telegram says, "Dear Esav, I've been living with Uncle Lovon for the past 20 years. You should know he's a wicked person, and I had to put up with his trickery, with his dishonesty for all these years. Who knows what could have happened to a person spiritually during this time and under these circumstances, but you should know that I maintained my levels of ruchnius, I kept learning, and despite the fact that no one was watching, I learned nothing from it, I remained an erlech. All the best, Yaakov, your brother Yaakov." What a strange thing to say. Esav is a Rasha. Esav is a very wicked person. He is not interested in ruchnius, in spirituality, and therefore this sort of memo to Esav seemingly is of no benefit, and it seems like a strange way to. It's certainly not the Joe Reed effect. If you want to talk to Esav, you're going to talk about hunting or all the averas that he enjoys committing. Why does he talk to him about his own spiritual standards and progress? It seems very strange. There is a concept in psychology called projection. Projection essentially says that the way I think about another person, I assume that person thinks the same. So, for example, I often imagine the scene at a Shabbos lunch, and it's getting later in the afternoon, you're getting a little bit tired, you want to have a Shabbos rest, you say that so-and-so looks a little bit tired. Well, really what you're saying is you look tired, you feel tired, and therefore your projection is that other people look tired, etc., etc. The English phrase is, what Peter says about Paul says more about Peter than it does about Paul. It's the same idea. I came across in my files, I forget where I got it from, but it was an email that I years ago got, I think, from Rabbi Frand. He was on a subscription list where he quoted a beautiful idea from Mordechai Druk. Mordechai Druk has a Sefer Drash Mordechai, and Rabbi Frand quoted the answer, this explanation, to this very baffling Rashi. Esav is fully aware that he is fake. He knows who he is. He knows he's a Rasha. And he knows that he goes into Yitzchak and he asks all these questions about being mafresh maisa on salt and these sort of things. He knows that he is fake and he's deceiving everybody. But projection tells me that he assumes other people are fake as well, that they're not sincere. Rav Mordechai Druk tells the story that one time he used to give a shiur somewhere, and he was a bit late, and he was running towards this shiur. And just opposite the place with the yeshiva where he was giving a shiur, there was a shul, and the shamash from the shul came out, and he was looking for a tzenta, for a minyan man. And he said to Rav Mordechai Druk, "Can you help me with this minyan?" And he said, "Look, I'm very sorry, but I can't because I'm scheduled to give a shiur now. There's a lot of people waiting. I'm really sorry." And this shamash said to him, why can't you once in your life do something without getting money for it? Do something. If you come and make the minyan, I'm not going to pay you. Once in your life, do something without getting paid. Rav Mordechai Druk said to him, I don't get paid for giving this shiur. I'm not doing this for money, but there are people waiting. I'm really sorry, but I can't come and make your minyan now. When he was reflecting on that afterwards, Rav Mordechai Druk said that this shamash only did things for money. So therefore he assumed that other people only did things for money. And therefore he tried to persuade him that once in your life do something not for money. That says more about the shamash than it does about anybody else. And that's what's going on over here. Esav thought that just like I'm fake, that Yaakov's also fake. Really, Tom Yoshev Eholim, he sits and learns all day, but I'm sure he's doing a whole bunch of averas, just like I'm doing a whole bunch of averas. He's not really sincere, just like I'm not sincere. He's also not sincere, and Yaakov was fully aware of it, and therefore, ordinarily, Yaakov would use the Joe Reed effect. He would talk to a person in their language, but here he had to make a point. His point was that you, Esav, may be fake, but I lived with Lavan for 20 years. And there wasn't a Jew within hundreds of miles. I could have acted like a heathen, and Lavan wouldn't have cared if I didn't study Torah. None of the neighbors would have cared if I didn't daven Ma'ariv with a minyan. But nevertheless, Taryag Mitzvah Shamarta, I kept all 613 commandments because I'm an Elech Yid, I'm an honest, upright Jew. And that's why I deserve the Bechorah and not you. So really, says Rav Mordechai Druk, what Yaakov Avinu is saying to Esav over here, he's telling him, the telegram goes and says, Taryag mitzvah shamarti, v'lo lamadati memaisiv haroim, because I am for real as opposed to you, Esav, who is fake. Okay, that's the first idea. The next idea is from the next psukim. Vayoshuv hamalachim el Yaakov leimar banu el Esav, el achicha el Esav, v'gam holech likroscha v'arba ish imay. And your brother Esav, there are 400 men coming with him. Vayira Yaakov ma'od vayetzela, and Yaakov was very distressed. He was very scared. Vayachatz esaom, and he split the camp. Asher itzo v'satzom v'sabok v'agman mishnei machanos. And Yaakov Avinu splits the camp. There's a beautiful piece I came across. I saw it in Rabbi Rosner's Sefer. He refers to Rabbi Yaakov Naiman in Darkei Musa. Rabbi Yaakov Naiman has a beautiful Sefer. He started a yeshiva in Petach Tikva as a Talmud of the Chavetz Chaim and others. And it's a very beautiful Sefer. Let's go through his mahalach in this. It's very, very special. Omrim Chazal. This is, if you're looking on the sheet, it's the second box, the last box on the page, the first page. Omrim Chazal. She Yaakov Pachad shebishvil shnei devarim she Esav kiyem. That what does it mean that Vayira Yaakov Moed Vayetzela? What was Yaakov worried about? So of course, different explanations. Says the Darkei Musa, says Yaakov Naiman, he was worried about the two mitzvahs that Esav kept them to such a level that he, Yaakov, felt that he was lacking in this area. What were they? Number one, Kibbutav Ve'em, and number two, Mitzvahs Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Says the Darkei Musa, Noira Hadova, it's astonishing. Al Esav Omrim Chazal, the Parsha told us, V'hu Oyef. We're talking about a person about whom Chazal say, when it says in the Pasuk at the end of the Parsha told us, V'hu Oyef, that he was famished, he was exhausted. She chomish averis over ba'is hayom. Some say 3 Gemaras, some say he did 3. He brings a source which says 5 averas. Me'achamuras b'yoseh, some of the most strict and terrible averas he committed on that day. And Yaakov Avinu, and in contrast, Yaakov Avinu, the Pasuk describes him as Ish Tom Yoshev Eholim, Mefachid me Esav. He was worried about Esav. You've got a person who's an Avarian, and you've got Yaakov Avinu, who was an Ish Tom Yoshev Eholim. Why on earth should Yaakov be worried about this person? However, he had Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Afa Pisha Esav Harasha Bavada Le'eschaven L'Shem Mitzvah. And even though Esav was living in Eretz Yisrael and did not intend to do so L'Shem Mitzvah, V'lo Yasa L'Shma, and he wasn't doing it L'Shma, B'chol Zois Pachad Yaakov. You see, nevertheless, that Yaakov was worried. We see from here. You see, first of all, the first inference is the power, the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. Even though logically we don't understand it, that the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael mashpia, in its sort of influences a person, even on a person who is a tremendous sinner, to some degree in his neshama. So that's number one. You see from here the power of the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. Yaakov Avinu was very worried that Esav had somehow been influenced Latov in that, and therefore that was one source of his fear. Next one. Says Rabbi Yaakov Naiman, Ki ish hamayla, an elevated person. If an elevated, lofty individual sees another person who has some sort of maila, some sort of worthy attribute, and he himself doesn't have it, even though this person has many other very worthy mailas, I give the person who has one milah which I don't have as much, I give him tremendous honor, and I'm nervous, I'm scared that this person is much more of a worthy person than I am. I could have many more worthy attributes than this person, but in one specific area, he's doing better than me. So I'm jealous of that that lofty level. That the difference between a very worthy individual, an elevated person, and a simple person is a person who's a growing person, who's a ben aliyah, who's an elevated person, always looks around and tries to find worthy attributes in other people to try and emulate them. Like the Ramban writes in his famous essay to his son, if you see a worthy character trait in another person, humble yourself in front of other people so that you can learn from their worthy attributes. Furthermore, that it's brought in Cheves Halvonavus and Shach Perik Vav. It's told about one of the Chasidim that they passed by a dog that had been killed and was decaying. How disgusting. And the Chassid replied to his students and said, but how white are the teeth of this dead dog? And the others regretted speaking disparagingly about the dog. And if you can't talk negatively about a dead dog, that's the Cheves Halvavos. Says Rabbi Yaakov Naiman, we see from here, even looking at a dead dog, the body of a dead dog, you can still find worthy attributes. He's got white teeth. Therefore, it's no surprise that Yaakov Avinu it's no surprise, therefore, that Yaakov Avinu can look at his brother Esav, who's a nefarious character, carrying out all types of averas, but yet can zero in and say, whoa, Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, Kibbud Av V'Eim, you're doing that well, let me at least emulate that, to see the silver lining in this personality. He's spatel lifnei Esav of pachad mimenu, and therefore, to some degree, he was mispatel himself, he negated his own self, and he was worried about the zuchus that the other person may have. That is the nature of an elevated person. He's always worried about his own shortcomings. Maybe I haven't yet fulfilled and reached the potential and the levels that HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects of me. Maybe I did a mitzvah, but I didn't do it l'shem shamayim. He's always suspicious of himself. But when it comes to your friends, you're judging him very favorably. You're doing things l'shem shamayim. Now listen to this, remarkable. Then Rabbi Yaakov Naiman carries on. He gives two incidents. I'm going to quote the second one. And this is the bottom paragraph of this box. V'chein ro'isi, Pam, unbelievable story. Shagan Hatzadik Rabbi Yerucham Zatzal, Mashkiach Yeshivas Meir. Says Rabbi Yaakov Naiman, I once saw the great Rabbi Yerucham, the Mashkiach of the Meir Yeshiva, pre-war Europe. Omad Bevarsha Berchoiv Nevelki. One of the famous streets in Warsaw was called Nebelki Street, I think it's called. Al Yidei Shar HaChotze Shel Achsanya Shalei. That Rabbi Yerucham was in Warsaw, and he was once standing on this main street, the famous street in Warsaw, by the front yard of his host, and he was looking out onto the street. V'nigashti elov, and says Rabbi Yaakov Naiman, I drew close to him. V'omar li, and Rabbi Yerucham said to me the following: Ki yesh le hispilus v'hispatlus mehapolishe idin bevarsha. He gets tremendous inspiration, says Rabbi Yerucham, from the Jews in Poland, in Warsaw. Why? Because they wear their own distinct levush. It was a Hasidic community. Their tzitzis, they're wearing their tzitzis out, their tzitzis over their shirts. And they've got long payas. Even though they're living in a Gentile city. They're very proud Jews. It's as if they've got stamped on their foreheads Ivri Anochi, the famous words of Yonah Hanavi. And they're walking in the streets of Warsaw amongst Gentiles, proud as Jews. And I recognize, says Rabbi Yaakov Naiman in Rabbi Yerucham, that he sort of negated himself against those businessmen. They were Hasidic businessmen, who were busy day and night in business. And Rabbi Yerucham was the greatest. Rabbi Yerucham was the great Mashkiach of the Meir, who spent days and nights in Torah and Avodas Hashem. And yet he sort of felt secondary to these Polish businessmen. Like Rabbi Yonah says, that tzaddikim always look for the attributes in other people, and Rishoim try and find their faults. So you see that, I've entitled this section FOMO, fear of missing out. That you see that Yaakov Avinu was scared of Esav. Why was he scared? Because the mark of a great man is to look at others, even people like Esav, and to find attributes of them and say, do I measure up to that? Perhaps in that area, he's surpassing me. Maybe I can learn from that. That is really the mark of a great man. Interestingly, perhaps that's why we are okay to use blessings from dubious sources. That we can point to Yaakov Avinu as a precedent to say that he looked at Esav and said, I can admire some aspects of Esav, his kibbud av aim, his Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. And that, there's a Rabbi Rosner Sushtel's a Torah Tamima, that's the Torah Tamima, that's a Baruch Epstein, Baruch Halevi Epstein, Baruch, the son of Yechiel Michal, the son of the Aruch HaShulchan. He has a pirush on Tefillah called Baruch Sha'ama, a beautiful pirush. And he says there in the Hakadama, just in the paragraphs before, Matov Alecha Yaakov Mishkanesecha Yisrael, it's an interesting thing. The Jewish people, when they walk into shul in the morning, they say the words of Bilam Harasha. How can that be? So let me read you what it says in the Baruch Sha'ama. It says, V'omnon, royo v'gam muchruch lo ha'ir. It's appropriate to point out, says the author of the Torah Tamima, B'inyan zeh prat echad ikar v'yisodi. Let me share with you an important principle. Ki afal pi shedarish lekabel ha'emes mikol adam. Even though it's appropriate to seek out the truth from everybody, afal pi kein darish lahagbil ha'kabola mi shehu eina min v'koifer. That's only true if the person you're doing it from, you're drawing this lesson from, is not a min or a koifer, is not an apikoros, and is not a heretic. Avol misha nitfas b'minas v'kvira, then you can't learn anything from them. Oz afki advarim la'ason ruyim lekabel ach mipnei sheyetzim mikar mishchus shel minus. Since it's coming from a very destructive source, we don't learn from them. And dinim kedin sefer Torah, they got the status of a sefer Torah shekals for min, which the Gemara in Gittin says sheyisar if you got to burn it. Avol bilam v'lovon, but Bilam and Lavan shelomadnu midivrem, we do learn from their words that Bilam we say Matov Alecha Yaakov Mishkanesecha Yisrael, and Lavan we say the bracha Chesenu Atayid Alfei Revavos that we say to every color at the bedeking. Kamoshe Vonu Lamal Barucha Heim Lo Hayu Minim. They weren't minim. Shahari Hashem Nigna Aleim, but the Kodesh Baruch Hu appeared to them. HaKadosh Baruch Hu appeared to both Bilam and to Lavan. V'gam nechshavu bein Nevi'ei Umas Ha'olam. The Gemara says that they're considered Nevi'ei Umas Ha'olam. V'hoyu rak ma'onim u'melach Hashem. Okay, they're involved in some sort of black magic and necromancy and things like that. So therefore you see that perhaps that's why we're okay to use blessings from dubious sources. Okay, so therefore the bottom line of this idea is that Yaakov Avinu, as it were, had FOMO, fear of missing out. What does that mean? He was afraid that he lacked certain positive characteristics that Esau possessed. And of course, the message for us is that we should be able to look beyond the surface and recognize the positive traits of others, and we can internalize them and improve ourselves. One final idea, a very interesting thing that the Pasuk says much later, Vayova Yaakov, this is the last box, or the penultimate box, Vayova Yaakov Shalim Ir Shechem, Asher Be'eretz Canaan, B'voim Padna Aram, Vayichan Es Pnei Ha'ir. So after the whole encounter with Esau, Yaakov Avinu moves on, and he comes Sholem, he comes complete to Shechem, and the next chapter unfolds. But the expression is Vayichan Es Pnei Ha'ir. Now Vayichan is an expression of encamping. That he encamped in the face of the city. But there's a very interesting medrash. Look at this medrash. This is the last box on the page. Vayichan es pnei ha'ir, chonan es haponim shebe'ir. Vayichan, to encamp, is also related to the word chein, which means favor. So the medrash understands that to mean that Yaakov Avinu benefited the city. Hischil mishalech lohem darones, he sent them gifts. Tova'ache vayichan es pnei ha'ir, hischil ma'amid ha'hatlisin, that he would set up markets, or moiche bezol, and he would sell things cheaply to benefit the place where he was at. And you see from here, says the Medrash, that a person should be grateful, to show gratitude to the place where he is currently living, that he should benefit it in some form or shape. Let me just share with you, because what you see from this, you see from here the hallmark of great people is to be grateful, to show gratitude. I'm living in a town, that I need to help that town and show gratitude that I'm living in this particular place, and therefore I should try, to the extent that I can, to benefit this place. The hallmark of a great person is to show gratitude. Let me just finish by sharing one story. A story that I knew part of the story, but I didn't know an amazing postscript. And again, I don't know quite where I got this from, but it was on my files. An amazing story about Vayishlach. Vayishlach was the great Rosh Hashiva of the 20th century. He spanned 3 centuries. He was born in 1899 and died in 2001. He was, when he was a bacher still in Europe, he felt he wasn't learning at one point as well as he could have done. And it's hard for us to imagine what exactly that means. But he felt that he needed some Talmidim. He wanted to start saying a Shiur, and that would help him develop into his Torah learning and as a teacher of Torah. So he went to Rabbi Zalman Meltzer, and he asked Rabbi Zalman, who I think was related to him by an uncle of his wife, and he said that could he prevail upon Rabbi Zalman's son-in-law, Rabbi Aaron Kotler, who was then the Rosh Hashiva in Kletsk, that to ask him if Rabbi Shach could say a Shiur. So Rabbi Zalman said with pleasure. He spoke to his son-in-law Rabbi Aaron, and Rabbi Aaron rejected the request, because Rabbi Aaron felt that Rabbi Shach's style of learning wouldn't quite fit into that yeshiva, and he didn't want to confuse the Bachrim by exposing them to different styles of learning, and therefore he didn't allow Rabbi Shach to say the Shiur in Kletsk. Okay, that I think I was familiar with. But what I wasn't familiar with is a part 2 to this story. That many years later, Reb Shach was sitting in Bnei Brak. By now he was the Rosh Hashiva of Ponevezh. He was the great Reb Shach. And a Jew came into him and introduced himself as, his name was Reb Yaakov Chiga. Reb Shach got very excited. Yaakov Chiga, are you related to Reb Moshe Chiga? I think that's how you pronounce it. So the guy said, yes, that's my father. So Reb Shach was very excited. He goes, for 40 years, I was wondering what happened to Reb Moshe Chiga. He says, is he alive? Where's he living? He says, yes, he's alive. He lives in Yerushalayim. He goes, good, let's go to Yerushalayim now. I need to speak to him urgently. So he said, but the Rosh Hashiva, you're the Rosh Hashiva, he'll come to you, don't worry. So he persuaded Reb Shach and he was fine. So the Rabbi Yaakov Chiga brought his father soon afterwards to Bnei Brak to meet Reb Shach. He brought him in. He was very excited to see him. And Reb Shach said to him, a greisa yeshikoach, a great thank you. Thank you so much. What was that? The background is this. After that first refusal from Rav Aaron, Reb Shach felt that he needed a group of boys. So he went back to Rabbi Zalman Meltzer a second time to again ask him to prevail on Reb Aaron so he could say a Shiur in Kletsk. And this time Reb Aaron said, okay. He said, but I'll give you a small group of boys, but I'm just telling you, you'll say the Shiur. the handful of boys will hear the shir. They won't let you say a shir. The only way they'll let you say a shir if there is an elter abacha, there is an older boy who they can look up to and they recognize as a serious young man. If he is there, then the younger boys will pay attention to you. Let's get an alter bacha and he'll join the shir. And this alter bacha was Rabbi Chiga. And Reb Shach says, you are the one who enabled me to say a shir which was listened to properly in Kletsk, and as a result of that, I began teaching Torah, and now 40 years later I'm the Rosh Yeshiva of Ponevezh, and I therefore thank you because you really helped me to get to this point. But here's the point. For 40 years, Reb Shach held in the back of his mind, what happened to Reb Chiga? He was the one who really helped me to get to this point. And therefore, the Reb Shach kept this thought in his pocket all the years. He needed to express his gratitude to this man, and that's why he was so excited. All those years later, 40 years later, he came across his son. He managed to say thank you in person again, now that he had achieved what he had achieved. And therefore, the mark of a great person is to show Hakaras HaTov, to realize what an important value it is. Okay, there we have it. Parshas Vayishlach. 3 ideas. The first idea, the Imlovon Garti, the Tarag Mitzvah Shamarti, what a strange memo to send to the brother Esav. But, says Mordechai Druk, the idea was that he knows that Esav wasn't interested in Ruchnius and keeping mitzvahs, but he's talking to him not in his language. Normally he would use the Joe Reed effect. But here he was saying to him, listen Esav, I know you're fake, but I am sincere, because I lived with a fellow called Lovon for all these years in a place which was corrupt and promiscuous, and I maintained very high standards because I am for real, and therefore I deserve the Bechorah and not you. Then we had Fomo Rabbi Yaakov Neiman, that very beautiful idea, how Yaakov Avinu, a person of greatness, looks at other people, even people as lowly as Esav, but he can pick out some worthy attributes from him, particularly in the area of Kudush Eretz Yisrael and Kibud Av Ve'em, and perhaps that's why we're okay to use blessings sometimes from the dubious sources, like the Baruch She'amah says. And then lastly, gratitude, like the Medrash says, Vayichan es pnei ha'ir, that Vayichan, he encamped, but also the Medrash understands it to mean that he benefited the city. Because if you have something, you receive something from someone or from some place even, you need to benefit that place. That's what the Medrash says, and that's what Yaakov Avinu did, as the Amoraim describe what he did to benefit that place. And that's really the hallmark of great people, to express gratitude for those who have benefited them. Thank you.